The Dominion had never known defeat. For 3,000 years, their fleets had swept across the galaxy like a dark tide, consuming everything in their path. Over 200 civilizations had fallen before them. Some had fought back with desperate courage. Others had tried to negotiate, offering tribute and loyalty in exchange for survival. None of it mattered. They took what they wanted and crushed anyone who stood in their way. Stood on the observation deck of his command vessel and watched the last city of the people burn. The gentle, six-limbed creatures had been peaceful traders before the Dominion arrived. They had no weapons capable of scratching armor. They had begged for mercy, offered their entire civilization's wealth, and promised eternal service. Had listened to their pleas with the patience of a predator watching wounded prey. Then he had given the order to begin the cleansing. This was the natural order of things. The strong consumed the weak. They were simply better at it than anyone else in the galaxy. A junior officer approached with a data tablet, took it without looking away from the burning world below. The report contained information about a new species detected at the edge of explored space. They called themselves humans, and they came from a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. Initial scans had classified there as a Category 7, which meant it was a place of extreme environmental volatility. Massive storms, seismic instability, temperature variations that would kill most species, and an ecosystem filled with predators competing for dominance. Found this mildly interesting but ultimately irrelevant. Species were often physically resilient, but they were also primitive. They spent so much energy simply surviving that they rarely developed the sophisticated technology needed to challenge the Dominion. These humans had only recently begun exploring beyond their own solar system. They were children stumbling into a universe they did not understand. He authorized a standard conquest fleet. 200 warships would be more than enough to bring another species into the fold of the Dominion. The humans would learn their place, just like everyone else. Across the galaxy, Admiral Gray stood in the command center of Earth's orbital defense station and listened to the refugees tell their story. They had escaped in a handful of ships, fleeing across the void with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the horror of what they had witnessed. Their leader, a female named, spoke with the hollow voice of someone who had lost everything. The Dominion was coming. They had detected human signals and dispatched a fleet. They had risked their lives to bring this warning because they hoped, foolishly perhaps, that someone might finally stop the monsters who had destroyed their world. Grace listened to every word. She was a small woman with gray streaks in her black hair and the calm eyes of someone who had seen combat and survived. She had spent 40 years serving in Earth's defense forces, rising through the ranks during a time of peace. She had always known that peace would not last forever. The universe was too big and too dangerous for humanity to remain hidden. She thanked for the warning and promised that they would find sanctuary on Earth. Then she turned to her officers and began preparing for war. Commander Price received his orders 3 days later. He was a tall man in his early 40s with broad shoulders and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. He commanded the carrier Relentless Dawn and her escort group of 12 vessels. They were some of the best ships in the fleet, crewed by men and women who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments. Read the intelligence reports about thee and felt something cold settle in his stomach. These were not raiders or pirates. This was an empire that had crushed hundreds of civilizations. They had technology that humanity could barely understand and experience measured in of conquest. The odds were not good. But had grown up on a farm in Kansas, where his father had taught him that a man did not run from his problems. You faced them head-on, did your best, and trusted that hard work and determination would see you through. They were coming whether humanity was ready or not. Running was not an option. He gathered his crew and told them the truth. A hostile fleet was approaching human space. They were outnumbered and anyone who wanted to transfer to safer duty could do so with no shame. Not a single person accepted the offer. The relentless Dawn and her escorts departed Earth orbit and headed for the frontier system of 442, where human mining colonies had operated for 3 decades. This would be the first line of defense. If the wanted Earth, they would have to go through Price first. Weeks passed as both fleets crossed the vast distances between stars, spent the time reviewing intelligence about human biology and culture. He learned that they were social creatures who formed strong bonds with family and community. They had a long history of warfare among themselves, which had made them surprisingly effective fighters. They were also remarkably adaptable, having spread across their dangerous and tamed it through sheer stubborn persistence. None of this concerned him. Many species had been warriors before the Dominion arrived. All of them had fallen. Humans would be no different. Spent the journey drilling his crews and studying tactics. He noticed patterns in how they fought. They preferred overwhelming force and expected their enemies to surrender once the situation became hopeless. They did not seem to understand the concept of fighting to the last. This might be a weakness he could exploit. The two fleets detected each other across the void on a cold morning in March. Broadcast the standard conquest demands: immediate surrender, disarmament, and submission to Dominion authority. Resistance would be met with total annihilation. Listened to the message with his officers gathered around him. The bridge was silent except for the hum of machinery and the soft beeping of sensors tracking the enemy fleet. He opened a channel and sent his reply. "This is Commander Price of the United Earth Defense Coalition. You are not welcome here. Leave now, or we will destroy you." Received the message and felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. It took him a moment to recognize it as surprise. No species had ever responded to Dominion demands with a threat. He studied the human fleet on his tactical display. 13 ships against 200. The human commander was either insane or stupid. He gave the order to attack. The fleet surged forward, and the first battle between humanity and the Dominion began. The fleet moved with the confidence of predators who had never met anything capable of hurting them. 200 warships spread into their standard attack formation, a crescent designed to envelope and crush enemy forces from multiple angles. Watched from his command throne and waited for the humans to realize their mistake. Soon they would panic, attempt to flee, and be cut down like all the others before them. The human fleet did not flee. Instead, the 13 ships accelerated directly toward the formation at speeds that should have killed everyone aboard. Lieutenant Maya Torres gripped the controls of her fighter and felt the G-forces pressing against her chest. The acceleration compensators were working overtime, but she could still feel the strain of pushing her body beyond what any other species in the galaxy could survive. Her squadron of 24 fighters led the charge, screaming toward the enemy at velocities that turned their small craft into weapons even before they fired a shot. She had grown up in Arizona, the daughter of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. Her parents had taught her that fear was natural, but letting it control you was a choice. Maya had made her choice years ago. She would rather die fighting than live on her knees. They opened fire when the human fighters entered weapons range. Energy beams and missiles filled the void, creating a wall of destruction that should have annihilated the small craft. But the human pilots were dancing through the chaos, pulling maneuvers that would have snapped the spines of pilots. They twisted and rolled and dove through gaps in the enemy fire that existed for only fractions of a second. Maya led her squadron into the heart of the formation. Her targeting computer painted enemy ships across her display, and she began firing. Her weapons were designed for fighting the dangerous creatures of Earth, powerful enough to kill predators that could shrug off lesser attacks. Against shields, they hit like hammers. 17 enemy vessels died in the first pass. Maya watched them explode and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. These were the monsters who had burned They deserved everything they got. Commander Price watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the relentless Dawn. His pilots were performing beyond his highest expectations, but he knew it would not be enough. They had numbers on their side, and they were adapting to human tactics faster than he had hoped. He needed to hit them harder. He ordered the carrier group to advance. The 12 escort vessels formed a protective screen around the relentless Dawn as they pushed deeper into the enemy formation. They were going to punch a hole through the fleet or die trying. On the surface of 442, Sergeant heard the distant thunder of the space battle and knew his turn was coming soon. He was a big man with hands from years of hard work and a face that rarely smiled. He had served in the Marines for 15 years, fighting in small conflicts and peacekeeping operations that had taught him how to survive against bad odds. The mining colony had 3,000 civilians who needed protection, had 200 Marines and a handful of militia volunteers to do the job. The math was not encouraging, but had never been good at math anyway. The first landing craft touched down an hour after the space battle began. Alien soldiers poured out, their bioengineered bodies armored and armed with weapons that could melt through steel. They expected easy prey. Instead, they found waiting for them. The humans had prepared the ground. Tunnels ran beneath the colony, connecting defensive positions that the scanners had missed. Explosives had been buried along the obvious approach routes. Every building had been turned into a fortress with overlapping fields of fire. Hit the detonator and watch the first wave of soldiers disappear in a storm of fire and shrapnel. Before the survivors could recover, his Marines opened up from concealed positions. The aliens had superior technology, but they had never faced an enemy who fought like this. Humans did not stand in neat formations and exchange fire until one side collapsed. Humans ambushed, retreated, ambushed again, and refused to stay in one place long enough to be destroyed. The ground commander requested reinforcements. Then he requested more reinforcements. Then he stopped requesting anything because had personally led a squad through the maintenance tunnels and put a bullet through his head. In orbit, stared at the tactical display and tried to understand what he was seeing. His fleet had lost 43 ships. The humans had lost 7, including several fighters, but the survivors were still fighting with the same fury as when the battle had begun. They did not seem to care about their losses. They did not seem capable of despair. He watched a human pilot ram her damaged fighter into a cruiser rather than eject to safety. He watched a human destroyer, engines crippled and weapons failing, position itself to shield a wounded carrier from enemy fire. He watched humans die by the dozens, and he watched the survivors keep fighting anyway. This was not how war was supposed to work. Inferior forces were supposed to recognize their defeat and surrender. These humans seemed to believe that death was preferable to submission. It was irrational. It was terrifying. Commander Price pushed his fleet through the gap Maya's fighters had opened. The relentless Dawn unleashed wave after wave of bombers and assault craft, targeting the largest vessels with relentless precision. The enemy formation was fragmenting, individual captains unsure how to respond to an enemy who refused to follow the expected patterns. Made a decision he had never imagined making. He ordered a tactical withdrawal. The fleet pulled back, leaving their dead and wounded behind. On the surface, the ground forces received the retreat order and began falling back to their landing craft. Let them go. His people had taken casualties, and pursuing a retreating enemy into the open was a good way to get killed. The battle was over. Humanity had won. Price stood on the bridge of his damaged carrier and watched the fleet disappear into the void. He had lost good people today, friends and comrades who would never see their families again, but they had done something that no other species in the galaxy had managed. They had made the Dominion bleed. On 442, sat in the ruins of a building and cleaned his weapon. Around him, Marines were treating wounded and counting the dead. The colony had survived. 3,000 civilians would live to see another day because 200 humans had refused to give up. Across the galaxy, composed his report to the Dominion Council. He chose his words carefully, knowing that what he was about to say would shock the leaders who had grown complacent after of easy victories. The humans were not like other species. They came from a world that tried to kill them every day, and they had conquered it through sheer stubborn refusal to die. They did not fear death the way other creatures did. They did not surrender when the odds turned against them. They fought with a savagery that the Dominion had never encountered, and they fought smart. For the first time in over 1,000 years, the Dominion had lost a battle, knew with cold certainty that it would not be the last. The humans were coming, and the galaxy would never be the same. News traveled slowly across the galaxy, but it traveled. Merchant ships carried whispers from port to port. Refugee vessels shared stories with anyone who would listen. Resistance cells hidden on conquered worlds intercepted Dominion communications and spread the impossible truth through secret channels. They had been defeated. A species called humans, from a small planet at the edge of explored space, had driven back a Dominion fleet. The invincible conquerors had retreated for the first time in 1,000 years. On 100 worlds, enslaved peoples heard the news and felt something they had forgotten existed: hope. High Arbiter summoned to the Dominion Council chamber on there. The chamber was vast and cold, built from the bones of extinct civilizations as a reminder of power. Sat on a throne carved from the skull of a creature that had once ruled an entire quadrant before the Dominion erased its species from existence. Stood before the council and delivered his report without emotion. He described the human tactics, their physical resilience, their refusal to surrender even when victory was impossible. He showed recordings of human pilots pulling maneuvers that should have killed them instantly. He played audio of human soldiers laughing and joking while enemy fire exploded around them. The council listened in silence. When finished, spoke. "You recommend we send a larger fleet." "I recommend we send everything," replied. "These creatures are unlike anything we have encountered. They must be destroyed before they spread their madness to our subject races." Considered this. The Dominion had 3,000 warships available for deployment. Sending them all against a single enemy would leave their empire vulnerable, but was right about the danger. If the humans inspired rebellion among the conquered peoples, the Dominion could face wars on 100 fronts. He authorized the full invasion fleet. 3,000 ships would descend upon Earth and wipe humanity from existence. There would be no negotiation, no surrender, no survivors. The galaxy would learn what happened to those who the Dominion. While they prepared for war, Ambassador traveled through the stars on a mission that many considered suicidal. She was a tall woman with red hair and freckles scattered across her pale skin. She had spent 20 years as a diplomat, negotiating trade agreements and resolving disputes between human colonies. Nothing in her career had prepared her for this. Admiral had given her a simple assignment: contact the species conquered by the Dominion and offer them hope. If humanity was going to survive, they needed allies. His first stop was a world called Prime, where the remnants of the people had been relocated after there was destroyed. The Dominion had turned them into laborers, forcing them to work in factories that produced weapons used to conquer other species. Their spirit had been broken by years of oppression. Was waiting when arrived. She was a resistance leader, one of the few who still believed that freedom was possible. Her family had died in the initial invasion, and she had spent every day since then fighting a war she knew she could not win. She looked at the human ambassador with eyes that held no trust. "Others have promised liberation before," said. They claimed they would unite the conquered peoples against the Dominion. The Dominion destroyed them in a single day. What makes you different? Did not make promises she could not keep. Instead, she handed a data chip containing everything humanity knew about fighting the tactical analyses, weapon specifications, communication codes, and detailed plans for coordinated resistance. It was information that could get every human in the galaxy killed if it fell into the wrong hands. stared at the chip. "Why would you share this? You gain nothing." "We gain everything," replied. "The Dominion is coming for Earth with their entire fleet. We cannot defeat them alone. But if you and others like you strike at their supply lines, their rear bases, their infrastructure, they will have to split their forces. That gives us a chance. And if we fail, if the Dominion traces this information back to your people." Smiled, it was not a happy expression. "Then we all die together, but at least we die fighting." Studied the human for a long moment. She had met many species in her years of resistance work. Most of them talked about freedom while calculating how to save their own skins. This human was different. There was something in her eyes that recognized. It was the look of someone who had accepted that they might not survive but had decided to fight anyway. "You are either very brave or very foolish," said. "Probably both," admitted. They shook hands, and the alliance was formed. Over the following weeks, traveled to dozens of worlds. She met with resistance leaders hiding in ruins and refugee camps. She spoke with former soldiers who had given up hope and convinced them to take up arms again. She shared everything humanity had without asking for anything in return except a promise to fight when the time came. Not everyone trusted her. Some species had been betrayed too many times to believe in salvation, but enough of them saw something in the humans that made them willing to try one more time. Maybe it was the fact that humans came from a place so dangerous that only the most stubborn creatures could survive. Maybe it was the way spoke about her people, with pride but also humility. Or maybe they were simply desperate enough to grasp at any chance, no matter how slim. High Arbiter learned of the human diplomatic mission through his spy networks. He was not concerned. A few scattered resistance cells could not threaten an empire that had crushed hundreds of civilizations. Let the humans waste their time building alliances with broken peoples. It would make their eventual defeat all the more satisfying. He focused his attention on the invasion fleet. 3,000 warships gathered at the staging point, the largest armada the Dominion had ever assembled. Was given command, with orders to leave nothing alive on the human. On Earth, Admiral Grace watched the intelligence reports and knew what was coming. The Dominion was bringing enough firepower to sterilize every planet in the Sol system 10 times over. Humanity's fleet was strong, but not strong enough to face those odds. She thought about her playing in the garden of her home in Shanghai. She thought about the billions of people on Earth who were counting on her to protect them. She thought about all the species across the galaxy who were watching to see if humans would break like everyone else. Grace was not a woman who gave up easily. She had fought her way up from poverty, earned every rank through hard work and determination, and buried too many friends to count. She was tired and old and scared in ways she would never admit to anyone. But she was also human, and humans did not know how to quit. She began preparing the defense of Sol system, knowing that the fate of humanity and perhaps the entire galaxy would be decided in the battle to come. Far away, received word that the Dominion fleet had launched. She sent one final message to the resistance network she had built. The time had come. When the Dominion attacked Earth, the conquered peoples would rise up. The galaxy would burn, and from the ashes, something new would emerge. Hope was a weapon, and humanity had just armed the galaxy. The Dominion fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, like a swarm of locusts descending upon a field. 3,000 warships spread across the void, their hulls blotting out the distant stars. Stood on the bridge of his flagship and gazed upon the small blue world that had caused so much trouble. Earth looked peaceful from this distance. White clouds drifted across blue oceans and green continents. It was a beautiful world, admitted to himself. It would be a shame to destroy it, but the humans had left him no choice. Admiral Grace received the sensor reports and felt her heart sink. She had known the enemy fleet would be massive, but seeing it with her own eyes was something else entirely. The Dominion had brought enough firepower to crack the planet in half. Humanity's defense fleet numbered just over 300 vessels. The math was not kind. She opened a channel to her commanders. Price was there, his face grim but determined on the. Captain Holt reported from Mars Defense Station, a massive orbital platform bristling with weapons. Lieutenant Maya Torres confirmed her fighter squadrons were ready for launch. Across the system, men and women waited at their posts, knowing that this might be their last day alive. Grace did not waste time with speeches. Her people knew what was at stake. She simply said, "Make them pay for every inch." The battle began. Expected the humans to concentrate their forces near Earth for a final desperate stand. Instead, they had spread throughout the system, using asteroids and moons as cover. When the Dominion fleet advanced, they ran into ambush after ambush. Human ships would emerge from hiding, unleash devastating salvos, and disappear before they could respond. It was frustrating. The Dominion had overwhelming firepower, but they could not bring it to bear against an enemy who refused to stand and fight. Every hour of delay cost them ships and pushed the invasion timeline further back. Had expected to reach Earth within a day. After 3 days of constant skirmishing, they had barely passed the asteroid belt. Commander Price led his carrier group through a maze of tumbling rocks, using the chaotic terrain to mask their movements. His pilots flew sorties around the clock, striking ships and racing back to rearm before the enemy could catch them. They were losing people, but they were taking far more than they gave. On Mars Defense Station, Captain Holt coordinated the defensive fire that was turning the approach to the inner system into a killing ground. The station's massive cannons could crack Dominion cruisers with single shots, and Holt used them with ruthless efficiency. He was an older man with a bald head and the patient eyes of someone who had spent decades waiting for a moment like this. The Dominion sent a strike force to silence the station. 50 warships converged on Holt's position, overwhelming his escorts and breaching his defensive perimeter. The station's shields failed section by section as enemy fire tore into the hull. Holt sent his crew to the escape pods. When his executive officer tried to drag him to safety, Holt shook his head. Someone needed to keep the weapons firing until the last possible moment. Someone needed to buy time for the others to escape. He stayed at his post as the station died around him. The last thing he saw was his final salvo striking the Dominion command ship, turning it into an expanding cloud of debris. Then the reactor overloaded, and Mars Defense Station became a new star for one brief, brilliant moment. The sacrifice bought humanity 12 precious hours. Mourned the loss of his command ship from a replacement vessel. He had transferred his flag just hours before the human captain had destroyed it. The near miss shook him in ways he did not want to admit. These humans were not just fighting. They were willing to die in ways that took their enemies with them. It was a kind of warfare the Dominion had never faced. The fleet pushed onward, grinding through human defenses with sheer weight of numbers. For every Dominion ship that fell, the humans lost ships they could not replace. The mathematics of attrition favored the, and everyone knew it. Grace watched her fleet being whittled away and refused to despair. Every hour her people bought was another hour for the resistance to act. Networks had gone silent days ago, which meant they were either moving into position or had been destroyed. Grace chose to believe the former. Price led his carrier group in a desperate assault on the Dominion formation. The relentless Dawn had taken heavy damage, but her weapons still worked and her crew still fought. They punched through the enemy screen and drove deep into the heart of the fleet, weapons blazing in all directions. Maya Torres flew with her squadron through hell itself. She had lost count of how many sorties she had flown, how many friends she had watched die, how many enemy ships she had destroyed. Her fighter was held together with emergency repairs and stubborn determination. She should have been dead a dozen times over, but somehow she kept flying. The Dominion closed in on Earth. Their remaining 2,000 ships formed a ring around the planet, preparing for the final bombardment. gave the order to charge weapons. In minutes, the human would be reduced to molten slag. Then the communications officer reported something impossible. Signals were coming in from across the galaxy. Dominion outposts were under attack. Supply depots were burning. Rear bases were being overrun by forces that had appeared from nowhere. The resistance had risen. On 100 worlds, enslaved peoples turned against their masters. Ships that had been hidden for years emerged from concealment and struck at Dominion infrastructure. Communication networks went dark as saboteurs destroyed relay stations. Ammunition convoys vanished, their crews either dead or defected. Led the assault on the weapons factory where her people had been forced to labor. They fought with tools and stolen weapons, with rage that had been building for generations. The Dominion garrison never stood a chance. Stared at the cascade of alerts flooding his tactical display. The Empire was burning. Worlds that had been conquered centuries ago were suddenly in open revolt. The fleet he had brought to destroy humanity was now cut off from resupply and reinforcement. High Arbiter sent a furious message demanding that detach forces to suppress the rebellions. It was the strategically sound decision. The Dominion could not survive if its entire empire rose against it. But had come too far to turn back now. He had lost too many ships and too many soldiers to leave without victory. The humans were on the verge of defeat. One final push would finish them. He split his fleet. 1,000 ships would remain to destroy Earth. The rest would return to crush the rebellions and restore order. Grace saw the enemy formation divide and felt hope kindle in her chest. The odds had just improved from impossible to merely terrible. Her battered fleet still floated between the Dominion and Earth, and they were not finished yet. She opened a channel to Price. "Commander, I need you to do something stupid." Laughed. It was the tired laugh of a man who had not slept in days, but there was genuine amusement in it. "Admiral, stupid is what we do best." He gathered what remained of his carrier group and prepared for one last charge. The relentless Dawn turned toward the enemy flagship, engines roaring with everything they had left. The final battle for Earth was about to begin. The relentless Dawn burned through the void like a wounded animal making its final charge. Commander Price stood on the bridge and watched the enemy flagship grow larger on the. His ship had taken more damage than any vessel should survive, but she was still flying. His crew had been awake for days, running on stimulants and determination, but they were still fighting. They were going to board the enemy flagship. It was insane. It was probably suicide. But if they could kill and throw the Dominion fleet into chaos, it might give Earth the chance to survive. Maya Torres flew escort alongside the carrier, her fighter squadron reduced to just 8 pilots. They cleared a path through the enemy interceptors, absorbing fire that would have torn the larger ship apart. She watched 2 more of her friends die and kept flying. There would be time to mourn later, if there was a later. The relentless Dawn crashed into the Dominion flagship's docking bay with a screech of tearing metal. Before the dust settled, was leading his Marine assault team into the enemy ship. They moved through corridors that had never been designed for human feet, fighting soldiers at every intersection. The aliens were taller and stronger than humans. Their bioengineered bodies could shrug off wounds that would kill a normal person, but they had never fought in close combat before. Broke a soldier's arm with a move his grandmother had taught him. The alien screamed and tried to back away, but was already inside his guard, driving a combat knife into the gap between his armor plates. Around him, his Marines fought with the savage efficiency of people who had grown up on a world that tried to kill them every day. They had conquered the galaxy through superior technology and overwhelming force. In the tight corridors of their own ship, those advantages meant nothing. What mattered was speed, aggression, and the willingness to take punishment that would stop any other species. Humans excelled at all 3. received reports of the boarding action and felt something he had not experienced in centuries: fear. The humans were cutting through his guards like they were nothing. His elite soldiers, the finest warriors in the Dominion, were being slaughtered by creatures half their size. He drew his ceremonial blade and waited. If the humans wanted him, they would have to take him themselves. Outside the flagship, the battle for Earth reached its climax. Admiral Grace committed her last reserves, throwing everything humanity had against the Dominion formation. Ships that should have been in for repairs fought alongside fresh vessels. Pilots who had already flown too many sorties launched again. Then the sensors detected new contacts, emerging from faster-than-light travel. For one terrible moment, Grace thought the Dominion reinforcements had arrived. Then she saw the identification codes and felt tears prick her eyes. They were not Dominion ships. They were vessels from a dozen different species, all of them peoples who had been conquered by They were there, flying warships that had been hidden for generations. The remnant had come, despite being nearly extinct. Species that Grace had never heard of fought alongside species that had been enemies for centuries. The resistance had not just risen, they had come to fight beside humanity. Commanded the contingent from a ship that had been built in secret over 50 years. Her people had never forgotten how to fight. They had simply been waiting for the right moment. When the humans had given them hope, they had seized it with both hands. The combined fleet struck the Dominion formation from behind. Caught between two forces that began to break. Individual captains, seeing their empire crumbling around them, made choices they would never have considered before. Some surrendered, some fled, some fought to the death out of pride or desperation. On the flagship, Price reached the command deck. His team had taken casualties, but enough of them remained to finish the job. They breached the final door and found waiting with blade in hand. The commander was impressive, even had to admit that. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body a perfect weapon shaped by of genetic engineering. He had conquered worlds and crushed civilizations. He was one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Shot him in the knee. Collapsed with a howl of pain and surprise. He had expected the human to engage in single combat, to prove his worth as a warrior. Instead, the human had simply removed the threat with brutal efficiency. Walked over and kicked the blade away from the alien's reaching hand. "You wanted to know why we keep fighting," he said. "It is because we do not fight for glory or honor. We fight to protect our people, whatever it takes, however long it takes. We do not stop until the job is done." Stared up at the human with something that might have been respect. "You are monsters." "No," replied. "We are survivors. There is a difference." He contacted Admiral and reported that the enemy commander had been captured. Moments later, the Dominion flagship broadcast a surrender signal. Without their leader, without reinforcements, surrounded by enemies on all sides, the remaining ships had no choice but to yield. The battle was over. Humanity had won. In the weeks that followed, Ambassador worked to build something new from the ashes of the Dominion. Representatives from dozens of species gathered on Earth to discuss the future. Some wanted vengeance against others wanted to simply rebuild their shattered civilizations. All of them looked to humanity for guidance. Helped draft the charter for a new galactic coalition. It would be an alliance of equals, dedicated to mutual defense and peaceful cooperation. No species would dominate the others. No empire would rise to threaten the galaxy again. Signed the charter on behalf of the people. When she pressed her hand to the document, she thought about her family and all the others who had died under Dominion rule. They would never see this day, but their sacrifice had made it possible. Admiral Grace retired after the war. She had given everything she had to the defense of Earth, and she was tired in ways that sleep could not fix. She spent her remaining years in a small house by the sea, watching her play and knowing that they would grow up in a galaxy where freedom was possible. Price returned to the fleet. There was still work to be done, patrols to run, and scattered Dominion holdouts to deal with. But sometimes, when his duties allowed, he would stand on the observation deck of whatever ship he commanded and look out at the stars. The galaxy had called humanity. They had meant it as a description of where humans came from, but it had become something more. It had become a promise. Humans had looked into the void and refused to be afraid. They had faced an empire that had never known defeat and taught it the meaning of loss. Maya Torres eventually became an instructor at the Flight Academy. She taught the next generation of pilots how to fly, how to fight, and how to never give up no matter how bad the odds looked. She told them stories about the friends she had lost and the victory they had won together. The Dominion did not disappear entirely. Some of them integrated into the new coalition, learning to live as equals rather than conquerors. Others retreated to distant corners of the galaxy, nursing their wounded pride and dreaming of revenge that would never come. The galaxy watched them carefully, but the fear they had once inspired was gone. Because the galaxy knew something now that it had not known before. There were creatures out there who came from a world that tried to kill them every day. Creatures who did not know how to surrender, who would fight to the last breath, and who would share that fighting spirit with anyone who needed it. The Armada had arrived, and the galaxy would never be conquered again.